Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation with WRAL Investigates senior producer Randall Kerr, we're talking about money that was intended to help bail out businesses negatively affected during the pandemic. It came from the Paycheck Protection Program. But now the feds have learned that not all of the money in North Carolina ended up in the right hands. Randall, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Amanda.
So first, can you explain to us where did the money come from for what they call the PPP? Who did it go to, and what was it intended to do?
Okay, so PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, was a twofold process, one in 2020, one in 2021, where the government essentially made about $800 billion in refundable loans available to businesses. And as it's called, the Paycheck Protection Program, it was designed to keep businesses open and people on payrolls during the pandemic when a lot of businesses shut down. And the idea behind it worked. It saved a lot of businesses. But with the alacrity that they put this into place, there weren't a lot of checks and balances off the top, which is understandable. And as we get further away from these loans being made and in many cases forgiven, I think the last number that I saw was about 90% of the money that went out has been completely forgiven. So businesses aren't having to pay back anything as long as they can prove that the money was used to pay people, to pay rent, to pay utilities, and et cetera.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So those were some of the things that they were allowed to use it for. Anything else? I mean, keep the lights on, pay the rent, pay your employees.
Yep, keep your payroll the same was the end goal of that.
So that people would not be sitting out during the pandemic without a paycheck, and then they would likely have a job to come back to because the businesses could stay open.
Correct.
That was the goal.
Yep.
So let's talk about the money was not being used in some cases as it was intended to be used. How did the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Eastern North Carolina learn about this?
Kind of a long story. Obviously, anytime there is essentially a handout, there are going to be people that take advantage of it. I guess the way the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of North Carolina, Mike Easley, put it during our interview is there were plenty of people that took from the needy to keep for the greedy. When there is money available, and at the beginning and as the process has gone on, the goal was to get the money out quickly to save jobs and then hopefully find the fraudulent stuff on the back end, which is where we are now, and that's really what we're looking at as part of the story.
So maybe not as much oversight on the front end. What are some of the things this money has been spent on?
Vacations, vehicles. In some cases, it'll be one person who filed for a loan that may have had a corporation, in a state, but they didn't do any business and they filed and got money. That's a lower end one. Some of the cases that have gone through the Eastern District of North Carolina have actually been, pretty close to organized crime and racketeering, where you actually have hubs of PPP fraud where they just teach classes on how to conduct it when this was going on, how to fake like you're making payroll so it looks like everything is above board, and that's why so many loans have been refunded, is because everything looked like it. People would teach other people how to recruit names, employee identification numbers, write personal checks that look like paychecks to somebody. I give you a check, you cash it, you give me back 80%, I give 10% to the person that taught me how to do it, and you get 10% for doing nothing other than cashing a check.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be right back after the break with more from WRAL's Randall Kerr about just how big this problem is here in North Carolina, what the possible consequences are for people who committed fraud with this money. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with WRAL's Randall Kerr about companies that basically are accused of taking bailout money during the pandemic but did not use it the way it was intended. So there is a task force now, right, with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Eastern North Carolina looking into that. Tell me what they're finding in terms of how big this problem is.
There are some estimates right now that about 10% of the PPP money that went out was fraudulent. So that's out of $800 billion. That's a pretty good chunk of change. So, a lot of U.S. attorneys, and you see this across the country, they have a pet project or, one specific crime that they're going after. Mr. Easley has certainly made this a priority for his office. He created this task force, and we're talking several federal and state agencies that are involved in this, that vet tips, go through paperwork, look for things in the paperwork that don't quite add up to what you would think would be a legitimate business. And, the one good thing is Congress just passed a new law that gives prosecutors in these cases until 2030. So the statute of limitations got extended by a lot.
So they can continue
to investigate. So they can continue to go out and get this money. And so when they go out and they find somebody that they think committed PPP fraud, it's not about just charging them with a crime. Their goal is to get back as much money as they can that belongs to you and me and everyone listening. We paid for it.
And I understand they have 30 indictments so far here in North Carolina and maybe as many as 30 more on the way.
So how he explained it is that they have 30 indictments so far, 30 in the hopper, which means they are close to getting to the indictment form, and they have at least right now 200 other cases that they're looking at that they suspect will get to that level. Obviously not there yet because they're early on in the investigation, but he said as the task force, it's only been in place for about a year, as they've been getting better at this, they can start turning out cases quicker and quicker because they know what the red flags that they're looking for. So I would expect this to pick up a lot in the next couple of years. But like I said, he made it very clear. He has until 2030 to get back as much taxpayer money as he can. He's going to take until 2030 to get back as much money as he can.
So through your research, you and Cullen Browder found some examples of companies doing this in our area or that you suspect of doing this.
Sure.
You did your own investigation. What did you find out?
When you go through PPP loans, it literally is a spreadsheet of hundreds and thousands of lines just for North Carolina of all the businesses. And so, one thing that we did was we would go through and look for company names that were repetitive. We'd look for agents or company owners that were repetitive. And another thing we looked at were addresses that were repetitive. And in some cases, it could be a strip shopping center that just has the same basic address, but not, suite number may be different. And so, after, we received a tip specifically in this story, and we're not naming the owner or the businesses specifically because we were initially tipped off that they were under investigation, but we can't confirm that independently, so we're not going to name them.
Sure, that makes sense.
But it's a gentleman and his wife that have 7 or 8 companies. They got about 15 or 16 different PPP loans, all for roughly the same number of employees. And in research, it appears that only one of those businesses is actually, quote unquote, in business.
A brick and mortar business that's actually
it has.
occurring.
They have a physical location. They have a web presence that shows that they are a business. We visited that location, left letters for the owner, emails, calls, never heard back.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Did any of these companies respond to you?
Nope.
So obviously they're probably not wanting to be, they don't want to be on the radar for this at this point.
Correct. And we were asked by the U.S. Attorney's Office to share our information once our story airs. If there's a company or if we find companies that we have suspicions about, that they welcomed that. So we have not decided if we're going to do that yet because that's not our job.
Sure.
But we'll see what happens
that.
and give, we've been trying to reach this gentleman for over a month now and haven't heard back. So I'm not
You're not hopeful.
Don't think it's going to happen, but we'll see.
So obviously going through the queue, this is a very long process. But if these companies, if it's proven they committed fraud, what can happen to them and where does the money go? I mean, you mentioned it comes back to the taxpayers. How does that happen?
So they pay civil fines and forfeiture. That would be part of a sentence in these cases. And they talk about finding any assets that they can in bank accounts. They make people sell property, and it would go back to the entities that that were in charge of distributing it. Obviously, if there are fines, those would stay local. But the forfeiture, a lot of the forfeiture, U.S. attorneys' offices have the ability to keep a certain portion of that to pay for the investigation, but then a lot of it just goes back to the entities who were cheated out of this money to begin with.
And bottom line, we're talking about what's happening here in North Carolina, but this is happening in every state in the country right now.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the cases in the Eastern District that were recently indicted, and I talked about the criminal activity in the hub, that was actually based in Texas, and they actually had recruits in North Carolina that were running the Texas scheme, learning how the Texas people did it, and they started replicating that here.
Amazing. Well, Randall, thank you for breaking this down for us and bringing us up to date on this situation. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or on whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news events and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.